Hi, and welcome to another Rule of Carnage review. Well, it's technically a preview this time. A Discord member, Grimskull, was good enough to send me through a copy of this guy, Torch and Shield, which should be hitting Kickstarter in October. That's October 2023, just in case you're watching this in the far distant future. I'll just get a bit of vested interest out of the way. Grimskull is one of our Discord members, and somebody who I've had chats with. They sent through a preview copy of the book, so this isn't the final release version, although it's a very nice looking hardback book, and 10 dwarf miniatures for me to try it out with. It was totally unsolicited, and as usual, the channel is completely independent. I've certainly not been paid for any of my views here. Long story short, really enjoyed the game. I've played it through with Mike, and I've been sort of fiddling around with it solo on my own. We'll get into more detail in a second, but spoiler, I really like it. It's a really nice game. After we played the session, we had a little chat, and Mike just stopped for a second and went, yeah, this is some top tier game design. So that would be Mike's review. But for now, we'll move on to in Torch and Shield, you play a group of dwarves that are delving into one of their lost holds. So this is a world where the dwarven holds have all been lost, and the dwarves are essentially pushed out refugees living in the towns of men. And some dwarves want to go back into their old holds, either to reclaim them and sort of go back to the glory days of the past, or simply to loot them from the treasures that have been lost within. You play a relatively small band of dwarves, 5-6 miniatures for a starting game, and obviously you can build up, you can have larger groups. There's a campaign system, there's solo play options. As I mentioned, I've been sort of fiddling around with it solo. It's essentially a player versus engine style game. So while yourself and your opponent have got groups of dwarves, the hold itself has been overrun by monsters, and they're going to be sort of attacking you as you play. So if you sort of overly concentrate on each other, they can sort of kill off dwarves and sort of pick them off from behind. And in some of the later campaigns, later scenarios, you'll probably actually have to work together to overcome the monsters. There's a light mechanic, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is really nice. So the deep dark of these holds are shrouded in darkness. You have to bring down any light sources, because while the dwarves can see in the dark, not quite as well as the monsters can. And if you're caught in shadow and darkness, not only do the monsters have buffed stats against you, but you will suffer sort of darkness random events that can sort of pull off a dwarf, or have them jumped on by a larger monster. So there's a real tension there of sort of getting through the mission quickly before your torches burn out and you're stranded in the darkness. There's a nice push and pull between focusing on the other player and focusing on the monsters as they come along. Really strong. It's very narrative. There's lots of sort of optional rules to play through to give you sort of interesting storyline moments. Like, for example, obviously you've got torches, you've got burning elements, so dwarves can get set on fire. You can sort of put yourself out in a stop, drop and roll. But if you find like a well or a water source, you can get soaked, which will put out the fire, but then you will be permanently unable to light torches or fires to carry with you. So it's just these little sort of story moments laid into it. It's played on a gridded dungeon layout. So if you've got anything like Silver Tower, Hero Quest, Battle Mats, any sort of RPG, sort of square gridded mats, you can totally play the game. I think it's a really lovely way to get extra usage out of any of those elements you might have around. And I think I know that I've sort of spoken before about, you know, loving the sort of non-discrete nature of tabletops, but I think particularly within a dungeon delving sort of setting, it makes a lot of sense. I don't think, you know, gridded sort of systems have no place, and in this particular sort of arena, it makes perfect sense. It's totally obvious because you're down there, you're in the dungeons, you're probably going to have grids or grid-like elements on anything that you're using for your layout, and it totally works with the sort of crunched-in, closed-down, claustrophobic combats that you're going to be experiencing in the game. So, before I start going too much into the sort of rules and details of the game, I'll move on to so I'll talk generally about some of the way the mechanics in the game work that I really enjoy, and then I'll move on to some of my personal favourite rules in it in a minute. Activation is a mechanic that's particularly, I think, nicely done within this game. So each player has a deck of cards, and at the start of each turn you'll draw a hand of cards, and then activation runs through the cards from ace, which could be high or low, through king, queen, jack down, and as you get to each sort of rank, if you have a card of that number, you call it out and then you use it to activate a dwarf. So you have to call out your cards, although you can keep one to one side sort of each round, so there's one you could sort of pull out and not need to call. But then you choose which dwarf you assign it to. You then play through the delving phase, which is where you move, engage, you can fire ranged weapons, you can search for treasure or engage with objectives. Then the monsters get to move, and then you get a fighting phase where all of those engagements are actually resolved, which is a really nice sort of mechanical touch, because what it means is that you can't sort of alpha strike onto somebody because you have like a bunch of higher cards than them, because the fighting is going to be stepped out. So in fact, there's a lovely sort of push-pull we found where you want to activate first in order to sort of pin down certain combats, and you get the option to decide who fights who. But on the other hand, if you go a little bit later, you get to have some sort of reactions to sort of re-engage and sort of define out certain combats, and that's when you can sort of outnumber or sort of resolve outnumbering, so you know it goes back in your favour. So it doesn't sort of overly weight the advantage if you happen to have a handful of high cards. If anything, you know, you want to sort of a nice range of high and low cards in your hand, so it never sort of feels like you're, you know, overly crushed by that draw of cards. Also, each dwarf has like a set of normal actions they can do, and then sort of additional special actions that are triggered by the suit of the card. So you have your normal move, engage, fire, ranged weapon, you know, engage with the objectives, and then depending on the suit you might be able to sort of rush like more swiftly, or fight with sort of terrible fury, or search for treasure, or whatever it happens to be. And some of the dwarves have additional actions that they can trigger depending on certain suits and their sort of special abilities. List building is relatively simple at the moment, and with the base rulebook there's going to be a handful of clans. So each of the dwarf sort of clans have their own ways of fighting and their own preferences. So I think at the early version of the book there's going to be the Copper Brows, who are even more gold obsessed than a normal dwarf. So they've got a bit more sort of fancy engineering bits and pieces, a few sort of tricks up their sleeves. There are the Iron Thanes, who are the sort of slightly more traditionalist shield wall, you know, martial, solid and stubborn dwarves, and the Balderaz, which are like your sort of your troll slayers, your sort of crazy, you know, martial psychopaths who want to punch a dragon to death with their bare hands. So you've got a nice sort of range of narrative options, and each of them have little tricks and abilities that they can do to give you sort of just enough flavour. I spoke a bit about the sort of the narrative elements within the game, and there's enough there to sort of give you options and give a story to what's happening without sort of overwhelming you with, like, 10 pages of special actions that you could sort of engage with. For me, and like to my personal taste, this is exactly how a narrative game should be done. I'm not sort of knocking games that give you sort of a massive list and come to you essentially saying, okay, you decide what your story here is, and we've got a menu of like bits and pieces and tools you can pick from to sort of tell that story. What Torch and Shield is saying, okay, look, this is the story we want you to be telling. This is what we want to be happening and engaging you with. And here are these sorts of things that are going to be suitable to that story. So it provides you much more sort of support in building your story, and it's much more crafted. It knows what it wants to do, and it absolutely offers it in spades. It really supports you in telling those stories. It helps you to sort of build your narrative. It's not giving you the sort of just a sort of random toolbox. It's got a bunch of things, and everything makes sense and everything works together. Combat and events are resolved by a dice pool, which is, I think, really lovely because it's super simple and super quick. So dwarves have a range of stats. When they're trying to do a particular thing, they roll as many dice as their stat, and 5 or 6 are successes. If you get more successes than if you get at least one success, you generally achieve the thing that you're trying to do. In combat, your opponent also rolls and takes their successes off. In normal events like lighting a torch or searching for treasure, just a single combat is generally sufficient. Combat is quite swiftly resolved. Basically, if you have like one additional success, you try to wound, and there are some saves, and then injuries are resolved with a card flip. So after you've gotten through, you realise you've done some damage, you flip out a card, and that will tell you how bad the injury on the target dwarf happens to be. Monsters come in like a range of grades, so there's swarms, broods, brutes, and hellions, sort of working up in toughness. Swarms and broods don't take injuries. You basically hit them once and they're dead, which is good because the dwarves are going to have to get through quite a few of them, so it's good that there's sort of a trade-off, whereas the brutes and the hellions can really take you on one-on-one. The hellions can more than take you on one-on-one. If you see one of those, you're going to have to sort of have the dwarves swarming them to take them down. Also, one of the things I like, and I go into that a little bit more detail, is the AI for the monsters is particularly nice, but I'll talk about it in a second. As I say, there's a campaign system, there's a set of scenarios, and one of the things I think is like particularly nice is that these scenarios are grouped out into quick and simple and more advanced scenarios. So you can see the selection for if you want a nice quick game or a relatively simple one or something a bit more involved. Lots of lovely things in the little things in the rule book. Some simple little call outs. There's an index. Why aren't there more indexes? There's an index in this. So like every sort of tiny little rule, and you don't want to have to be flicking through, you can look it up in there's an index. There's a common keywords sort of glossary version thing, and there's also a common actions glossary, and there's lovely reference sheets at the back of the game. Me and Mike played this. I'd read through the rulebook a couple of times. Mike hadn't read it at all, and even in our first game, even with the sort of the narrative range of options, the relative complexity of sort of having lots of choices, and the crunchiness of a story-based game, it was super quick to play. Rules were easy to find, easy to reference. Everything that was needed was right there. The rulebook is, I think, really nicely sort of set out and laid out and set in a way that really, other than a few moments, we never found ourselves searching for rules, and we could just constantly be sort of running the game and telling the story, which obviously is what we all absolutely want. So yeah, really nice rule book. I think really particularly sort of well set out and well crafted and put together. Splendidly functional. And I'm not a big fan of lots of background text in the rule book. This is one of the rare ones where I was going through the rules and I read one of the bits of background text. I was like, okay, I've got to go back and read the rest of this story because I actually want to see where this went and where it turned out. So I think there's sort of, for me, just the right level of background text, lovely guidance throughout the book to where you're going, really nicely laid out. I kept sort of going to the reference sheet to sort of play through the round sequences, and then I realised after a little while I was just better off actually flicking through the rulebook because it's so nicely ordered in giving you exactly what you want in the order you're actually going to want it during play, that even flicking page to page, or now it's this phase, now it's that phase, and following through step by step just felt smooth and elegant and quick. So I ended up actually sometimes just skipping the reference sheet, and the whole rule book is laid out in the way that it's as efficient as using a reference sheet in a really, really good way. So yeah, loads of narrative elements, really nice activation system, swift and sort of effective combat, loads of really lovely things generally in the mechanics of the game. But I'm going to take a second to pick out some personal favourite elements in there, so we're going to move on to... Okay, so my 3 specific favourite rules in the game, and there's quite a few bits I really like in here, but my three favourite bits is, first of all, as I mentioned before, the AI of the monsters. We've talked quite often about AI on the channel for Minis games. It is difficult to do, and it is difficult to do effectively. And Torch and Shield has given itself a lot of advantages in doing it really smartly. Obviously, first of all, you've got the fact that it's a player versus engine game. So the monsters just have to be a sort of present threat. They don't have to be the primary thing that you're having to deal with, and it's done in a way that works very effectively. Oftentimes, when you have sort of 2 players competing with the game sort of also attacking them, it doesn't quite gel and doesn't quite click, and here it totally makes sense, partly because of the setting and partly because of the way it's driven. Also, they've given themselves, I think, a useful tool insofar as this is a gridded based system. So pathfinding for AI specifically is going to be a lot more logical and simple, and there are sort of little bits in the rulebook laying out some of the unusual pathfinding elements, and they've obviously been able to control those elements because of the nature of the design. So that side of it works really well. The bit I particularly enjoy is that sort of each of the grade of monsters has a set of AI options, a little menu of AI choices, and a ranking, and those choices are graded to what's happening to them. So if a monster is engaged, it will take a very specific additional action. If it can see an enemy, it has a specific thing it can do. If it can't see an enemy, then it has a specific sort of wandering activity. And that's really nice again, because the game, as I said earlier, steps out combat. So you have this sort of the delving phase where the dwarves will move around. Then you have the monster phase where the monsters can move, or if the monsters are engaged, they can perform a specific engaged action, and then they will fight in the fight phase because everybody fights in the fight phase. So it means that an engaged monster, although you've been able to sort of pin it down, and it's very advantageous to sort of pin a monster in a doorway because obviously they're going to try and swarm you, the monster then, because it's been engaged, gets a little extra sort of juice because it gets its engagement action, which will slightly advantage it in the fight action. So again, it puts a bit of pressure on you for sort of whether you can engage the monster, when you're going to sort of deny it that engagement action. One of my particular personal favourite things is Generally, the combat has a lot of sort of knockback and knockdown elements because it's sort of in a claustrophobic area. If you get cornered into a wall, you're going to be significantly disadvantaged because basically any hit at least sort of pushes you back a space, whether or not it injures you, and therefore, if you're cornered and you're being pushed into walls, you're going to fall down, and obviously being knocked down is going to give you further significant disadvantages. The monsters, some of the monsters, have a drag ability rather than necessarily a knockback one. So there's this lovely sort of these great moments where a dwarf that's sort of gotten swarmed is being dragged away by the monsters away from their friends, which can exacerbate the swarming element, and then the monsters are trying to drag you back to the monster entranceway, and if they drag a dwarf over into there, he goes down off into the hive, into the labyrinth below, and he's instantly killed. So it gives a really lovely little narrative sort of feeling as a dwarf is being absolutely swarmed by these swarm monsters that are dragging them off, and you can picture them sort of, you know, calling for their friends, kicking and screaming as they're being dragged into the darkness. And it's a really nice little element, and it's sort of locked in there with this very simple to follow and understand and engineer stepped out AI system, and it makes every one of the monsters sort of have a real personality without asking you to go through pages of rules. Each of these stepped out elements are on the sort of the monster stat cards if you choose to use those, and they're just simple little steps of options, but that little menu, that little extra bit of spice to each monster really gives them a lovely bit of personality. Just very quickly in relation to the fact monsters, can swarm you and grind you down. A nice little other element is that your wounds are your sort of resistance against being wounded. So without needing to work in lots of sort of complicated, injuries, you've got to remember, oh, he's had his leg smashed, he's got this going on. There's a really simple thing where you've got your wounds. So for example, an armoured dwarf will often have a resilience of 3. So 3 is what you reduce the opponent's strength by when they're trying to wound you. As you take wounds, you take resilience damage, so that resilience goes down. So each time you're hit, you're easier to wound next time, and you have this single stat for wounds and resilience toughness, whatever you want to call it, which again, super elegant, super simple. One number that you need to remember, one number that you need to track, which tells your sort of the level of wounded you are, and neatly tracks your exhaustion, you're being run down. Just lovely, lovely design choices. The second of the things, the particular rules I really like, is, again, the way that light works within the game. As I say, you're going down into these holes, they're dark and terrible, and the monsters have, like, advantages within the darkness. Throughout the game, you have a fuel level, the scenario, and it counts down with each turn, which is randomly generated, which again is quite nice because it gives you a very different sort of feel each time you replay the scenario. So again, it's a simple single roll that gives a lot of replay value. Each turn fuel counts down. When the fuel runs out, all of your light sources might blink out in the next turn. There's a random roll for that. So again, it gives this lovely tension to the game, like right from the get-go. You know that you have a limited amount of time, because once all the lights go out, you're absolutely going to get swarmed by monsters who they're going to be much more legitimate threats. So whilst you want to stop the other guy from doing what he's doing, whilst you want to actually beat him in the scenario and overcome him, you also know that you're both very much on a limited clock as to how you're going to achieve these things. So there's a real tension there for the game. There are turn limits, but a lot of the time you not necessarily want to go to that turn limit, because if you run it all the way out, you're going to be at quite a risk by the time you get to the end of the term limit on the scenario, which again is something I particularly love. I really like it when a game finishes out because the players choose to finish it out because of something emergent, a mechanic within the game, rather than the game saying, well, it's time now. You might be in the middle of doing something, but apparently magically we'd stop after 6 turns, which your characters don't even know what the hell a turn is. Whereas here, where you're looking at the fuel level, you're looking at your torches, you're worrying about your wounds, and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to turn back usually before the turn limit, is just really nicely done. It's sort of really elegant, really lovely. The last of my favourite rules, and I know that I already mentioned it in the mechanics, but it's such a nicely done thing, I want to go into a tiny bit more detail there, is the activation system and the way it works through sort of in some more detail. So as I said, you have a deck of cards. You'll draw one card per dwarf +1 if you have your leader alive, and your leader can save one of those cards to the next turn. Otherwise, and you can choose to, you discard them all and draw again. And again, you go through the sequence of cards, and has anyone got a king? Has anyone got a queen? Etc. etc. And the suits are then ranked out. And if you still have a draw, the chosen one of the round picks who goes first. And it's so elegant and it's so neat. It steps out the activation in a way that sort of totally makes sense. As I say, it gives you this real push and pull of like, do I want to activate early? Do I want to sort of pin somebody down so that they can't get through to my guy who's like trying to run an objective? Or would I rather activate later and try and sort of outnumber somebody and pick how the combats are going to go? And I'd say the suits give you options. So you've got your standard activations, which are moving, evading, fighting, shooting, etc. But the suits give you extra abilities. So, for example, spades let you search for treasure, or they let you sort of go defensive in combat. So if you've got a guy who's engaged and a little bit outmatched, and you've got another guy who's spare, you're looking at that spade thinking, well, do I want to use it for the defensive ability, or do I want to go looking for treasure, which is often going to be victory points for the game? And it gives you these tight little choices. The activation system, I think, for stepping it out, for being elegant, for, of course, because it's a deck of cards and it has a memory, there's going to be a level of fairness which maybe you wouldn't have if it was a dice roll every single turn, where one person could just get unlucky over and over again. It's lovely to see cards and card resources combined with dice. It's nice to see those two sort of elements used and leveraged for the different advantages that both of them give. It's great to have the dice, and it's the humble D6. Although I will stop for a second to reference the fact that successes are 5s and 6s, fumbles are 1s, which happens to be exactly the layout of symbols on a Hero Quest combat dice. So I think somebody somewhere is like referencing back to a little bit of nostalgia in some of those choices. So you can totally play the whole game with Hero Quest dice, if that appeals, and it might well do to some people. Leveraging the fact that the dice, have sort of full and repeatable randomness that are easy to sort of quickly pick up a fistful and roll, whereas the cards, which you can't really easily dump down a bunch of cards in the same way, but give you this sort of greater affordance of probabilities and have a memory, and combining the two in a way that just makes so much sense and is so elegant and so nice, is just a lovely little bit of game design. This book genuinely had loads of tiny little things that are just perfect game design choices for the game itself. So yeah, I mean, full of clever little elements, but those are just a few of my sort of particular favourites that, as I saw them, they just really triggered sort of an acknowledgement of the intelligence and the thought that had been put into this. So yeah, to round up, as I say, I will put some details for the Kickstarter, which should be launching in October. If you enjoy dungeon delving, if you have a liking for Hero Quest Advanced, Silver Tower, any of those sorts of things. I happen to be playing through some Core Space at the moment with a play group, and this very much reminds me of a sort of fantasy dwarf sort of style of Core Space in a really good way, actually. I think a slightly more a slightly more elegant and engineered version of Core Space, a little bit less Ameritrashy, bit more of a feeling like you've got sort of genuine sort of tactical control and options, whereas sometimes, in a lovely way, Core Space can just be a bit like mad things happened. Yeah, I think if any of those sorts of things appeal to you, if you believe that the best thing about Hero Quest is the dwarf, then having full teams of dwarves going raiding down into the deep darkness of Barad-dûr or whatever sort of collection of consonants and Zs you believe is your particular hold, this does it absolutely splendidly. If you enjoy narrative games, if you enjoy a game that tells a story and comes to you with a story that it wants to tell with you, this is absolutely going to be a great option. As I say, the Kickstarter should be going up soon. There's going to be options for both the book and the dwarf warbands are available. I'll put up some pictures of my ones along with some pictures generally throughout the video. Just a sort of a quick run over on the actual minis. I found them really sort of lovely to put together. They've sort of got a nice range of options and choices within the set of like hands and elements. So you have guys carrying lanterns, which might sound like a silly thing to really sort of love about it, but you don't, it's always weapons. You always get I've got boxes and boxes of hands carrying weapons. I don't have many hands carrying lanterns. So the sets themselves are intelligently designed to be able to sort of put your groups together with and play the game. I found them lovely to paint, good level of detail without sort of making me feel like I had to spend hours picking out absolutely everything. Just sort of a little bit of character and feel and detail to them, sort of just the right level. So yeah, the minis themselves are great. Obviously, there's tons of dwarf minis around, and you can totally sort of pick and choose what's going to work for you. I strongly recommend sort of going by the Kickstarter if you have any interest in a narrative dungeon delving game. Absolutely, pick up Torch and Shield. If you like elegant game design, if you're interested in game design and you want to see it done well, and if you want to see a nicely laid out rule book, people often ask me to recommend rule books or what is a good rule book. This is only the preview version. It's going to be made a little bit better by the time it actually comes out. This is a very good rule book. Functionally, factionally, the game aside, this book is good. It is well written, it is well laid out, it is well put together. This is how you should lay out a rule book. And the game not aside, the game's really good. It's really fun. It's really enjoyable. I strongly recommend stopping by the Kickstarter. I strongly recommend swinging by the Grimskald website and signing up for their newsletter so you get alerted straight away. And I would really recommend picking this up for a play. It's nicely written. It's detailed, without being overwhelming. It has elegant, intelligent game design, and it's a very satisfying play for the story that it's trying to tell. Okay, that is going to be it for this review. As I say, there's going to be loads of links down, and details in the comment section. Hopefully, stop by Torch and Shields, stop by Grimskald Games, check them out. Swing by the Discord. Grimskald is in there, and is more than happy to talk about Torch and Shield. Ask me. I've obviously read through the rulebook and played it through. If there are things I've left out of the review, something you're curious about, how do they handle this, how does it handle that, please ask. I'm more than happy to sort of give details, and I'm sure that Grimskald is more than happy to sort of talk about their design choices and details of the game. But for now, and from this review, from Will of Carnage and from me, it's going to be a thank you and goodbye. So thank you and goodbye. Bye bye. Back Torch and Shield. Bye.